Welcome back to the channel. We're going to be doing another reaction video today, and today we've got a really interesting one for you. William Lane Craig and Dr. Peterson are going to have an exchange about the meaning of life, and in particular, grounding objective morality. Where can you ground objective morality? Can you ground it in the natural world, or do you have to leave the natural world and go to the transcendent God? Without further ado, let's dive right in and let's watch this clip.
Well, I was very heartened, Jordan, by your affirmation of the objectivity of moral values and duties. You said there are things that are unquestionably good and unquestionably evil, that these moral values are not things that are invented, but they are discovered. And I couldn't agree more. And I would want to push you on this to say that this very consideration ought to help you to move through naturalism and beyond naturalism to a transcendent ground for the objectivity of these moral values and duties, because they won't be found in naturalism. The naturalist is trapped in the lower story. Objective moral values and duties are not physical entities described by the laws of nature. These are transcendent realities, either Platonic or else grounded in God. And therefore, the very affirmation of the objectivity of moral values and duties that was so strong throughout your talk, which I so appreciate. It's anti-relativistic, it's objectivistic. I want to encourage you to push through that naturalism to finding a transcendent ground for these in theism. I think that's the most plausible moral theory that will enable us to affirm the objectivity of these moral values and duties.
I've tried to work out the sorts of ideas that I portrayed in this talk today within a naturalistic framework as much as possible. Because the naturalistic technique is so powerful, not least for that, but also because there's glimmerings in the scientific literature of the sorts of ideas that you portrayed when you mentioned that the evolutionary biologists are increasingly making the claim that morality is a biological adaptation. And I think you can make a very strong case for that, a much stronger case than has actually been made so far. I think there is a very sophisticated ethic that has evolved that we recognize as a consequence of the evolution of our cognitive and emotional structures. I think that recognition manifests itself in admiration. People are very imitative. It's one of the things that characterizes us in contradistinction to animals who are not very imitative. It's probably the precondition for our linguistic capacity. One of the things that characterizes human existence is the capacity to spontaneously pick a model for emulation, right? A model for admiration. And that's the manifestation of that moral instinct, to say, well, to admire is to want to copy. You say, well, what do you want to copy? Well, you want to copy that which is most admirable. What is most admirable? Well, what is most admirable, that starts to become a transcendent question, right? You can imagine that the local examples of what's admirable, they're right in front of you, and they're concrete and tangible. But to abstract out from that which is admirable in and of itself is simultaneously to construct something like the representation of a transcendent good. And that's, to some degree, how religious conceptions emerge from their underlying biological substrate. Now, you might say, well, that's merely reducing the religious conceptualization, the religious abstraction of what's good, to the biological substrate. And I think you can read it that way, but I don't think that that necessarily indicates what it is. I think that the entire process of evolution is somehow shaping itself around maybe Platonic ideas, something like that, some transcendent good. And that it's a mistake to assume that just because you can make an association between the transcendent abstract good and the process of evolution, that one is necessarily reducible to another.
In
It
fact,
isn't the way
wouldn't that
reality
be to
works.
commit the genetic fallacy, to try to say that because one's moral beliefs originated through such a biological evolutionary process, that therefore they are explained away and have no objective validity? That just is to
Well,
commit a genetic
I
fallacy,
think
isn't it?
partly what happens too is that you at that level of analysis, you have to start questioning your initial presumptions, like the idea that the most true truth is objective, because I'm not sure it is. I don't think we understand what constitutes truth very well. And there's the truth that you act out, as well as the truth that tells you what the world is made of. And those aren't necessarily the same thing. And so things get very murky at that level of abstraction. But one thing I have learned from attempting to reduce religious preconceptions to their biological substrate is that there's always something left over that you haven't explained. And it's not something trivial, because every time I look into what's left over, it turns out to be unutterably deep. And I get rid of some more of it, and the rest becomes unutterably deep. So, yeah. Well.
Thank you.
An extremely interesting back and forth there, and just explanations of each's intent on what William Lane Craig is doing to push Jordan Peterson to try and ground his objective morality, his understanding of objective morality, into something transcendent and not natural. And of course, Dr. Jordan Peterson attempting to do that. And really, you can see him working out the idea of theism, of there being a God, of looking to ground this objective morality in this transcendent being. He's working it out on stage. So there's a few things that we can take away from this. The first thing is just to understand exactly what William Lane Craig was looking to do. Was he was just trying to encourage Jordan Peterson, who has already made mention in this in a talk earlier that evening, that he recognizes that there is an objective morality, that morality is not subjective, but there is an objective morality. And he is pushing him, William Lane Craig is pushing Jordan Peterson to ground that objective morality, to ground the reasoning for that objective morality into something transcendent rather than something natural, rather than grounding it into the natural world that we have, to ground it in something that is transcendent, or in other words, in this case, God. William Lane Craig essentially says you're not going to be able to ground it in the natural laws of this world. You will not be able to ground your reasoning for this objective morality in the natural ways of this world. Jordan Peterson goes on to say a couple things, and one of the things that he says is that he has tried. He actually makes the statement pretty much on the front end that he has tried and is trying, has been trying in his life to ground his understanding of this objective morality in naturalistic ways. So he's not seeking to find a God where there isn't one. He was really trying to ground his understanding of objective morality into the naturalistic world. The issue being, as he said over and over, is that as much as he does that, there's always something left over that is basically inexplicable. He's not able to ground all of objective morality into this natural world. Jordan Peterson gives an unbelievably interesting way of drawing this out for us when he starts to talk in the clip about pursuing admiration and what is most admirable. And he talks about the local examples of what's most admirable. And of course, we have local examples in this world of things that are admirable. There are people in our lives that are admirable. We might admire our parents. We might admire a coworker. We might admire all kinds of different people and different things. But Jordan Peterson says that we can only get so far, basically, at looking at what's admirable by looking at the things in this world. That can only take us to such a understanding, to a certain limit of understanding of what is really most admirable. So although we might admire other people in this world, it can only get us so far. His point is that when we think about what is most admirable, when we think about what is the most admirable thing that we can imitate, that has to be something that is admirable in itself, that is the definition of admiration that is worth imitating. And the thing that is most admirable is something transcendent, is something that is not in this world. So he makes that point for us, and then he goes back to and wraps up, and this is where we'll wrap up. He wraps up with the idea again of, as much as he tries to ground objective morality into a naturalistic world, and he tries to do this through biology, through a biological substrate. So at the end of the road, at the very last thing that he says that really ties all of this together, is that as much as he tries to ground his objective understanding of morality into this naturalistic world, in particular through biology, through a biological substrate, he's able to do that all the way to a point, and then there's always something left over. And this thing that is left over, he says, is not just anything that's left over, but it's, in his words, unutterably deep. There's always something left over that not only can he not explain, not only is it not trivial, it's unutterably deep. It's inexplicable, essentially. So he's not able to ground his objective morality into the biological substrate in our natural world. He's not able to do it. He can get so far in understanding that, but he can't get there completely. There's always something left over. And that something left over, he moves to the transcendent here, and you can see the beauty of somebody who is honestly trying to follow the truth the best that they can, looking at the objective facts that we have in this world, looking at the things that we have, the evidence that we have in the natural world, to take things so far, as much as we can, to explain them, and then to try and find, well, how can we ultimately ground these things? And you can see Jordan Peterson essentially getting there live on stage while William Lane Craig assists him along the way. It's an unbelievable clip. It's unbelievably interesting. It's about 5 years old now, so Jordan Peterson's come quite a long way since then. He still has some ways to go in terms of becoming a Christian and understanding the gospel message, and you can see in other videos that he's working through that. But this is an unbelievable moment where William Lane Craig just pushes him a little bit to try and move beyond this naturalistic explanation. And you can see Dr. Jordan Peterson doing that in his honesty and the integrity that he has in looking to try and understand what's really going on. It's an unbelievable clip. Thank you for sharing these moments with me. I hope you enjoy this reaction video. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. We'll be bringing plenty more reaction videos for you. If there's anything in particular that you'd like to see me react to, please leave it in the comments below. And until next time, we'll see you.